I spent 10 years of my childhood in one of the most highly respected orphanages in Sierra Leone, West Africa. And that gave me access to education I wouldn't have had otherwise. I graduated from college with honors when neither of my parents had ever attended a day of school in their lives. Growing up in the child rescue center gave me a tomorrow I couldn't have seen as a child. And then as an adult, I became the director of the orphanage where I grew up and decided to completely change the entire organizational model by moving all the children back into families and stopped running it as an orphanage. Why? The orphanage provided amazing services like education, healthcare, and food to help children with their basic needs. During my time at the orphanage, I lived in a nice children's home with all the facilities, but I longed to belong. As the director, I knew that although these needs were being met, we needed to help children build a tomorrow that included the families and communities they belonged to. We were beginning to realize that many organizations, including the one I was leading, were not necessarily serving orphans, but mostly children coming from poor families. So if they had families, why were they in the orphanage? You see, parents were choosing between sending their children to orphanages and caring for their children themselves. Why? Because the poor families want their children to have access to a better life, education, healthcare, and food. And the family was not able to financially provide these necessities, but they knew that the orphanage could. These families love their children and want to be with them. They send their children away because they love them. Once they send their children to the orphanages, the parents are assumed to either be neglectful or inadequate. Because the orphanage now considers their families to be unsafe, they completely lose the ability to interact with their children. This is something they might not have thought could happen. We then realized that we needed to be creating a holistic tomorrow where families and communities are truly empowered, where the trauma in children are not deepened by a separation from their families and communities, where overdependency doesn't become a trend, and where children thrive and enjoy true success in harmony with their families. Because ultimately, we want families to be able to meet their own needs as much as possible. We want them to thrive with dignity rather than being stuck and separated and dependent. Among the hundreds of millions of children in the world that are designated as orphans, 5 to 8 million of them are in an orphanage. However, UNICEF defines an orphan as having lost one or both parents. So, many of these children actually have one living parent. Also, this definition does not include anything about extended family who could provide for the child or the financial status of the family. The research shows that 80 to 90% of these children actually have a living parent who could care for them. You see, when we saw this global statistic, we were shocked. We decided to see for ourselves how we measured up. We did a survey of all the children that had ever lived in the orphanage. We discovered that of the total number of children who ever lived in our orphanage, 98% had a living parent who could have taken care of them if given the resources to do so. These children have parents who could care for them, but why don't they? You see, the number one reason they are in the orphanage is because their families are poor. Yes, poverty. Their families believe that their child's best hope is to give them to the orphanage. They believe this is the only solution they have to secure their child's future, but they are doing that at the expense of the love and connection that they and their child need to thrive. But what if we just found a way to support families so they could stay together? It seems like a choice between growing up poor with family or gaining access to education, healthcare, and opportunities while being separated from their family. But should any child have to choose between their family and the tools they need to be a better tomorrow? Can't we find a way to do both? Here's the thing though. Orphanages are not all bad. In fact, they can be helpful for short periods of time in crisis situations. But here is why orphanages should only be used for short periods of time. The impact of growing up in an institution has negative effects on children's development and ability to form healthy attachments and relationships throughout their lives. These effects have consistently been seen on children who age out of orphanages without ever being reintegrated back into families. A host of organizations have shown that children aging out of orphanages are 10 times more likely than peers to be involved in prostitution. They are 40 times more likely than their peers to have criminal records, and they are 500 times more likely to commit suicide. Are we still creating the better tomorrow for them? The research is very clear. Children separated from the love and care of a primary parent or caregiver have suffered a trauma. The separation itself is a trauma. Because when we take a child away from their family and place them in an orphanage, we are solving that child's immediate problems, but we are still leaving the poor family broken, their needs unmet, and their tomorrow not fully shaped, and the child loses his true sense of belonging. So as someone who spent 10 years in an orphanage and always longed for the care of my family, I know that the shift from residential care to family-based care is so important for bringing harmony to families that prepares them for a tomorrow where they can thrive. And if you make families stronger and help them to thrive, what happens? Their communities get stronger too, and they too begin to thrive. Of course, moving to family-based care has to be intentional and planned in order to ensure empowerment. Because if you place a child back into a family without addressing the root causes that brought them to the orphanage in the first place, you have created new problems and will not ensure their successful future. Now, this is where the how part comes in. How do we safely send children home? How do we set up vulnerable families for a holistic tomorrow? Well, we can start by gradually making 3 major shifts. First, the shift from orphanage care to family-based care. How? Reintegrate. We need to reintegrate children back into families, and we need to do this safely. This involves tracing the families and preparing both the families and the children to make sure they are ready emotionally to live together again. Reunify. Once the child is reintegrated, we reunify the family and make them whole again. We do this by providing wrap-around care to make sure that the family stays together. This is where family strengthening programs that build the capacity to manage on their own are critically important. This is where we provide case management support to strengthen family capacity so that they are ready to be on their own. Second, the shift from hand-out to hand-up approaches. You see, for decades, global aid has been focused on giving a handout to the vulnerable population. In as much as this approach has been effective for immediate interventions, it has further deepened dependency. On the contrary, The shift from orphanage care to family-based care is about giving a hand up, which has to do with preparing, equipping, and empowering families for a brighter future. This approach begins with the end in mind by tackling the root cause of poverty and preparing vulnerable children and families to unleash their God-given potential today and tomorrow. It's about shifting from methods that focus on addressing the symptoms of the problems and look towards providing approaches like family-based care that provide long-term solutions to address the problem of extreme poverty. Third, the shift from telling ideas to working together. We can start creating that holistic tomorrow by shifting from telling vulnerable parents our preconceived ideas of what we think they need to an approach that includes the family in discussions to create their better tomorrow. The truth is, they know their lives better and can determine what success looks like for them, what tomorrow looks like for them. It's about shifting from being the sole planners of their tomorrow to being partners with them in planning their tomorrow. This will help to change the limiting narratives vulnerable families hold for themselves and which outsiders often unintentionally reinforce. They think they are not enough, they don't have enough, and they are not capable. But look, they already have the potential placed in them, and we can partner with them in ways that can truly prepare them for a vibrant tomorrow. They already have greatness in them. A tomorrow where children do not have to choose between their basic needs or necessary resources and families. A tomorrow where vulnerable families are empowered for self-sufficiency. In summary, caring for a child is about building the capacity of the child to prepare them for tomorrow, how they will fit into and navigate the world. Children need that time, that love, that relationship, that one-on-one attention, and one-on-one emotional connection that family engagement brings. Because when children spend many years separated from family, they can lose their culture, their traditions, their language. But when they grow up in families, they grow in the knowledge of where they belong. As an African proverb says, home is not where we live. Home is where we truly belong. And that home is family. Let's build a tomorrow where every child belongs. Thank you.